Mark had been a taxi driver for over 10 years. He had seen all kinds of passengers. Drunk people too out of it to give directions, couples arguing in the back seat, and people asking to be taken to strange places. But nothing compared to what happened on that quiet night. It was almost 2 a.m., and Mark was ready to end his shift. The roads were nearly empty, and he just wanted to go home. But then, a new ride request popped up on his screen. The pickup location was at an old intersection near the industrial district. That area was mostly abandoned, and Mark rarely got calls from there. Still, he needed the money. He sighed and accepted the ride. When he arrived at the location, he saw a woman standing alone on the sidewalk. She was dressed in a long, dark dress that looked old-fashioned. Her head was slightly tilted down, and her hands were clasped together in front of her. She didn't wave or step forward like most passengers did. She just stood there, perfectly still. Mark hesitated for a moment. Something about her made him uneasy, but he had already accepted the ride, so he unlocked the doors. The woman moved slowly, stepping into the back seat, without a word. She shut the door gently, not slamming it like most late-night passengers. Mark glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting stiffly, her face half hidden in the shadows. "Good evening," Mark said, trying to sound friendly. "Where to?" For a few seconds, she didn't answer. The silence stretched too long. Then, in a soft, flat voice, she finally said, "Home." Mark waited for more details, but she said nothing else. Where exactly is that?" he asked. The woman lifted her head slightly, and Mark could now see more of her face. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, and her lips barely moved when she spoke. "I will tell you when we're close." Mark felt a chill creep down his spine, but he nodded and started driving. The GPS had no destination, so he decided to head toward a residential area. The car was silent except for the sound of the engine. The woman didn't fidget, check her phone, or even blink. She just sat there, hands still clasped in her lap, staring straight ahead. Mark felt uneasy. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. He kept glancing at her in the mirror, half expecting her to suddenly move or speak again. Then, after about 10 minutes, he checked the mirror one more time, and the back seat was empty. Mark slammed the brakes. His heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no movement, but she was gone. He turned around, expecting to see her crouched on the floor or pressed against the door. But the seat was completely empty. His throat went dry. Had he imagined her? Was he just tired? Before he could process what had happened, the GPS screen suddenly flickered. The map, which had been blank, now showed a glowing blue route. The voice navigation spoke in a robotic tone. "In 200 meters, you will arrive at your destination." Mark stared at the screen. He hadn't entered an address. He hadn't even touched the GPS. The car started moving again, almost on its own, as if something was guiding it. The buildings around him became older, more run down. The street lights grew dim, and soon, there were no other cars or houses in sight. The GPS led him down a narrow road, then stopped at a dead end. In front of him was an old, abandoned house. The windows were shattered, the walls covered in dark stains. It looked like no one had lived there for years. The taxi meter was still running. Then, the back door of the car creaked open. Mark turned his head in terror. The seat was still empty, but something unseen was stepping out. He couldn't see it, but he could hear the soft sound of footsteps on the pavement. Slow, deliberate. His breath came in short gasps. His hands shook on the steering wheel. The footsteps faded toward the house. The front door, which had been closed, slowly swung open by itself. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. He needed to leave. Just as he reached for the gear shift, a whisper came from the back seat. "Thank you for the ride." Mark didn't look back. He slammed his foot on the gas and sped away, not stopping until he was miles from that house. When he finally dared to check his rearview mirror, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The seatbelt in the back seat was still buckled, as if someone was still sitting there.